So with that, we can jump right in if you like, or
Yeah, if I could interject very quickly, it seems that Professor Montepuri is currently in a meeting with some students, so we are ready here.
great. So welcome everybody again. My name is Carmen Mezzera, and I am executive director of a group called APSIA, the Association of Professional Schools of International Affairs. And we're so glad to have the SFSU IR Master's Program as one of our affiliated programs. But in all, we are 67 different graduate schools and programs in 16 different countries around the world. And to be part of the APSIA family is to have shown the depth of the international affairs work that you do, as well as the professional focus of the international affairs work that you do. So as we talk today about the many different possibilities for graduate schools and the ways to pay for graduate school, I want to share some different insights that I've gleaned over the years, and then be very happy to answer whatever questions you have to make all of this process hopefully a little bit easier. It is UN Day, so I think it's a great time to be talking about these kinds of things. It's also National Bologna Sandwich Day, I learned, which I don't think has any relevance to this other than the fact that I like bologna sandwiches. So with that very random segue, let's jump right in and we can get started. Because the first question, of course, the very beginning of all of this, to ask yourself is why? Why would you go to graduate school? Why should you go? When should you go? What kinds of pieces make sense for you? And for some of you, maybe you will come to graduate school because you're looking for the change in salary that comes between jobs typically laid out for a BA compared to those typically laid out for those people with an MA. And the Department of Labor estimates that somewhere between $30,000 to $40,000. So for some of you, that might be what brings you to a graduate program. For some of you, it might be that you want to master a particular subject. Most undergraduate or pre-graduate school programs are a little bit more buffet style. So you do a little of this and you do a little of that. But within a graduate program, you hopefully are able to wrap your hands around some topic and carve out knowledge about that piece. It doesn't have to be something with a really fine point on it. My graduate degree is in international politics, which is still enormous, but it is a smaller subset of the even bigger field that is international affairs. So maybe that's what you're hoping to get out of grad school, is that carve out, that mastery of some piece, even if it's not something with a really fine point. Maybe you get to the point in your professional journey where all of the jobs that are next require that grad degree. And so without it, you sort of plateau and you can't access that next level until you've come to graduate school. I mentioned that the P in APSIA is for professional schools. So maybe you come to graduate school because there's a particular professional toolkit that you're trying to gain and bring into your skill set to help you move forward in your career. You will notice that it does not say on this screen, why should you go to graduate school? Because your grandma told you to. I am sure your grandma loves you, but she doesn't have to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to write all those papers and do all of that schoolwork. Other people come to grad school, including me, because they don't know what else to do with themselves. Those are very real reasons that people choose to go to graduate school. I would just argue that you get a lot more out of the experience and the time and the investment when you go for reasons like your own professional advancement, rather than because somebody else wanted that for you or because you didn't know what else to do. So again, those are reasons, but I think that these reasons are going to help you just have a richer and better experience than some of those other pieces. If you do, and if you decide to go to graduate school, the first question you need, of course, to figure out is, what is it that you're going to study? What is it that you will master? And this is going to take some homework and some research. And we'll talk a little bit later, and I mentioned this earlier, we at APSIA have lots of different tools and ways to figure out which kinds of schools are teaching these many different programs. But there's some questions I'll give you in a minute that you can help to start to sort between them. Because we know that after a while, all the marketing materials and all the websites start to sound the same. But at this stage, and we recommend this be about a year before you want to enroll. So for folks who are thinking about starting in fall of 2024, this is really that time when all of that homework should be underway. Start to think about what kinds of programs make sense, what kinds of topics, what sorts of subjects. And at this early stage, start to find a way to keep track of all of the different pieces that are going to be due. It could be a spreadsheet, it could be a piece of paper, it could be an app on your phone, whatever you need to do to keep all of the moving parts in all of the right places. Because as you get closer to those deadlines, lots of things are going to be due, lots of different elements are going to be needed. And also, some schools have different deadlines to compete for different things. So, from this early stage, start to figure out a way to keep track of all of those parts and pieces. The other thing you need to keep track of from the very beginning is the financial component. Lots of folks focus really on the academic piece and less on the financial piece until they get to the very end. And they go, hooray, I've gotten into this school. Now, how am I going to pay for this? But you really need to do the financial and the academic application planning at the same time from this early stage. And I'll talk in a little bit about the many, many different ways that you can pay for graduate school, but that really is a consideration that begins at the very beginning. So, how can you figure out which program makes sense for you? I think these 5 questions can really help people sift between different programs and figure out what it is they're really trying to get out of this experience. The first question is, what will you study? And that sounds like an easy question, but you can't just go by what the name of the degree is, what the degree is called. You really need to look underneath at how the program is built. What is its structure? What are the core courses that you have to take? What are the elective courses that you get to take? Is the program really prescriptive and everybody does this and everybody does that and everybody does this other thing? Is the program really flexible and it's going to let you marry together lots of different fields and interests and backgrounds and all of those pieces? Most schools are somewhere along the spectrum between highly prescriptive and highly flexible. So you need to figure out for yourself, where do you need to be on that continuum? Do you want to do the things that are in that core? Are there particular electives you're trying to bring in, and can you do that? Really looking at how the program is built, and most schools will have this openly available on their websites. If not, when you go to events or any of those kind of things, that's a great question to ask them. But that's really going to start to separate what happens with students in one program compared to what happens with students in another. So that's a great differentiator. That's why that's question number 1. Question number 2 is, are you qualified? And I promise, there is no one magic number that's going to get you into graduate school, and no one magic number that is going to keep you out of graduate school. But looking at the admissions criteria is really helpful for 2 reasons. First, schools are going to tell you about this completely imaginary average candidate that they have. And I say that because averages exist for a reason. It's math. To get to that average imaginary person, some students had more years of work experience, more languages, a higher GPA, and some students had fewer. So to have that imaginary person exist means there was a spectrum all along there. So you don't have to say, oh, well, I don't look like that. I couldn't possibly. Because obviously people who had more or less got in. That's how that imaginary average example came to be. So that's about how the school relates to you, how those imaginary criteria for admission. But looking at the average person is also useful for how you relate to the school. If that imaginary person just sounds awful to sit next to for 2 years of your life, you know that program may not be the right fit for you. So it's not just about your competitiveness, and it is useful to understand which schools are a bit of a stretch, which ones pretty solidly look like you, and which ones you're a bit more competitive for, so that you don't put all your eggs in one basket. But it's also about how you relate to them and whether you want to be in an environment full of people who averagely look like that. So the admissions criteria really does go both ways. So how is it built? What are the qualifications? The third piece, do you want to be where that program is based? We are really lucky in international affairs that there's no one city you have to be in. A lot of people say, well, I have to be in DC, or I have to be in Geneva, or I have to be in, no, you don't. You can be anywhere you actually want to be and live for at least 2 years of your life. So if you couldn't imagine living on the East Coast, or if you couldn't imagine living in a place without ITSITs, or you couldn't imagine living in a place where it snows all the time, whatever you need to survive and thrive, think about those things as you start to do your grad school search, because all of that is going to make sure you are set up for success in the course of that program and with all of the other factors outside of school. So if it's Korean tacos or warm weather or whatever you need to really be happy, think about that and make that part of your consideration process. So do you want to be where the program is question number 3. Question number 4 is, can you afford it? And again, I'll talk about lots of different ways to pay for graduate school, but this is more than just that. Lots of folks get themselves tripped up because they look at one tuition number for one semester in one narrow period of time. You need to look at how your financial situation relates to the program over the life of the whole journey and the whole program. So for some students, my colleagues in College Station, Texas, may be a great fit because they're able to give every student in-state tuition right off the bat. For those of you who might not yet be residents of California, my colleagues at the University of California, San Diego are able to give every kid in-state tuition after the first year. So tuition actually goes down for those students between the first year and the second year. That may not apply to many of you, but there are other schools that will have similar considerations, whether it's in Maryland or in Pennsylvania or in Michigan or Texas, wherever you happen to be. Look at the arc and the life of the financial commitment over the whole program. Don't just look at tuition, look at the full package. What are the fees? What's the cost of living? How do all of those pieces come together to understand what that program is going to ask of you and what you're committing yourself to? And likewise, does the program have support for what happens in the summers? What kinds of average financial aid is available? Lots of folks get tripped up by saying, well, this tuition is here and this tuition is here, so this is the right place for me. But when you look at the whole package, it can really rebalance and look different. So be sure you've got a full and complete understanding of that financial situation before you immediately say this one is more or less cost effective or more or less expensive than another. So that's why that's piece number 4. Can you really afford what it's actually going to be? But the 5th question to me is the most important. What is the professional fit of that program to what it is that you're trying to get out of this experience? And that's why we started with all those questions about career advancement and professional development. I'm not saying you have to know exactly what job you want, but it's very helpful to know broadly, what is the direction I am trying to go and what kinds of things am I trying to master so that I can find a program that's going to move me in that direction. And if you aren't sure yet, one bit of advice I always give is to read job descriptions for stuff you are fantastically unqualified to do right now, but just sounds really cool. And as you do that, you're going to start to see some common themes among all of those really cool sounding jobs. So once you do that, you can say all the really cool jobs need this thing and this thing and this thing. And then you can hold that up to schools and say, okay, of the 5 things all the cool jobs really need, this one's going to give me 3, this one's going to give me 4. Oh, this one's going to give me all 5 and maybe something else I haven't thought of. It gives you some way to broadly gauge what kinds of skills you're going to build in that experience that are in the direction you want to go, even if you don't know, 15 minutes after I graduate, this is exactly the job I want. And again, I'm happy to talk about skills and I'm happy to talk about careers, but that's just some useful tools to figure out what kinds of professional things make sense for you, because that to me is really where all of this needs to be grounded. So how is it structured? What does the imaginary average candidate look like? Where is the program? What is the full and total financial experience? And then what is the professional fit? Those 5 questions can really help you sift between programs and figure out what makes most sense for you. And I'll make sure that our colleagues have this slide deck, so you'll be able to revisit these questions. And we also have a video that goes through them again in our YouTube page. It's about 3 minutes. So if you forget all of those pieces, that's a good way to revisit this particular list of things. So after that big search that you've done and all that discernment, comes time to really focus on the schools that you're interested in. Seek them out, build relationships with them. They want to be in relationship with you. And this can be a way for you to start to understand what the admissions committee is looking for, what kinds of things they're trying to draw out in their application materials. You can figure out what kind of faculty, what they're doing, what they're researching, what kinds of things they're looking at, and how you can put forward the most competitive application. We have a ton of these events online and around the world throughout the year, and so do the schools. So go meet with them, talk with them. It can also be helpful because if you talk to them and you're like, oh boy, was I wrong? That is not the place for me. That's also helpful because you know where not to apply. And after a while, and this should probably be about 6 to 9 months out, you should finalize the list of target schools and start to think about how you craft a quality application for each one of them. A common question that I get is, how many applications should I do? And my answer is the number that you can actually do a quality tailored application for. For some of you, maybe that's 10. For some of you, maybe that's 2. Whatever you can actually deliver a quality tailored app, that's the number you should put forward. It's also useful at this point to think about where maybe you're not as strong. Maybe you don't have the level of quantitative skills or coursework that you know they're looking for. Maybe it's a school that really prides itself on service to others or leadership, and you want to do some more volunteering or figure out how you pick up some online internships or remote opportunities or freelance work. Thinking about where your application isn't as strong and showing how you're trying to address it is also a really helpful thing to do at this stage. If they're looking for standardized tests, and I will say fewer and fewer of our schools are requiring things like the GRE, this is also a good time to take it so you can take it again if you have to. And at this stage, it's time to pull that spreadsheet we talked about back out and start to think about what materials need to go to each school, because you're going to want to start to chip away at those pieces so that you can make sure everything is ready by the deadline. And as I mentioned, you have to keep up with that outside financial planning piece too, thinking about scholarships, thinking about those kinds of applications as well. So what kinds of materials might you need to turn in? In our space, there is no single common app, so every school is going to be different. But generally, you're going to need to do an application form and an application fee. Depending, there's sometimes ways to get the fee waived, but that is, again, where having a relationship with a school can be really helpful. You're going to need a CV or a resume. They are different things. So again, be sure you know what their school is asking for and follow directions. You're going to need transcripts from every institution you've attended. Some of you maybe studied abroad and directly enrolled in a school. You're going to need those transcripts. Some of you maybe did community college first, and then you came to SFSU. You're going to need those transcripts. COVID has elongated some of the processing times for these, so this is a great thing to knock out early because it could take longer than you expect. And that way you have given everybody enough runway to make sure everything gets turned in on time. I talked a little bit about standardized tests, and I'm happy to talk more about them if that's useful. Most schools, if not all schools, are going to require a personal statement or a topical essay, in some cases both, and I'll talk about that in a minute. You're going to need some letters of recommendation. I know that many of you are seniors, and so now is a great time to think back over your academic experience at the university level and to think about who are the professors that you want to stay in relationship with or rekindle a relationship with, who are going to be able to write you that quality letter of recommendation. If you've been working, if you've had any internships, thinking about who your supervisors are or were who are going to be able to write you those letters of recommendation. And whether you choose to go now or you choose to go in 5 years, being intentional about staying in relationship with them so that they are ready to deliver a quality letter of rec for you is really important. Doesn't mean you have to call them every week, doesn't mean you have to call them every month, but every year, every 6 months, figuring out how to say, Professor, how are you? What are you up to? What's going on? Here's what's going on with my life. Maybe you see an article in the paper that reminds you of something you did in their class. And you can say, oh, Professor so-and-so, I saw this thing, thought of you. Maybe you came across, hello, Dr. Ellis, came across your favorite Turkish restaurant and went, oh, I was having Turkish food the other day. Professor Ellis, I thought of you. How are you? Any reason you can think of on that irregular basis to get back in touch with people gives them a reason to say, oh, well, let me know what are you up to? How's it going? And you can share your story with them and they can get back in touch with you and just deliver that stronger letter of recommendation when the time comes. So it takes a little bit of intention, but thinking about who those people are that you want to have those bridges maintained with is really important, especially for those of you who are graduating, because what you don't want is in 5 years to have to call and they go, oh yeah, hey, how are you, right? I'm sure they care and they love you, but they have a lot of students to remember. So being intentional about that relationship building is really helpful when you need them, whether it's now or in 5 years from now. The personal statement is one piece that I know trips up lots and lots of students. So I want to take a little bit of time and talk about that because I know it was certainly the part that I had the most trouble with in my grad school apps. My colleagues in some cases are going to truly read thousands of these, and 700 of them are going to sound exactly the same. So how can you put forward a personal statement that is honest and true and distinctive to you and to your experience? I think part of that is being open and sharing all these pieces of who you were, right? What work experiences, life experiences, volunteer experiences, all of academic experiences, all of these things that bring you to who you are right now, this person that's applying to graduate school. Why do you want to go to graduate school now? Why not 2 years ago? Why not 2 years from now? What is it about this moment that is bringing you to the application process? And then who is it that you want to be? And why is that school, not any school, that school, the springboard from where you are to where you want to be? So that narrative, right? Who you were, who you are, and who you want to be is something they're only going to get in reading your personal statement. And it doesn't have to be necessarily in chronological order, but just something that draws out those different elements really makes sure that it's something distinct to you, and it shows the school how they fit into this broader narrative, broader journey of your life and your professional development, and why they make sense as that catapult into 2.0 version of you. So that framing can be a really useful way to put together your personal statement. And again, it doesn't have to be in chronological order, but a way to really put forward a distinct narrative that they're only going to get reading and learning about you specifically. So that can hopefully be one way to make the personal statement less daunting, less terrible, and really give you some food for thought about how you draw out all of those rich things that happened to you in the past, how that informs who you are, and what those goals are for the future. So about a month out, right, we've done all this research, all this discernment, and we focused and we focused and we focused. And about a month before everything is due comes the time to finalize all of these pieces. You're going to polish those essays. You're going to work on your scholarships. You're going to check in with your recommenders, who probably are not paying as much attention to the deadlines as you are. You're going to keep up with all your financial planning. And then comes that wonderful, terrible, scary, amazing day when you hit submit and everything goes off into the system. And it is a scary day, but it's also a great day because it's the product of all of that thinking, all of that relationship building, all of that discernment that you've done. And it's a way to really put forward this application of yourself to these schools and programs that you've gotten to know and that you've really picked out as the right place for you. And because you've done all that hard work, we want to make sure that you avoid some really common mistakes. I said this earlier, but truly, at a bare minimum, just follow directions. You would be amazed at how competitive you make yourself just by doing what they asked you to do, because a lot of people cannot seem to handle that, right? If they ask for 3 letters of recommendation, send 3 letters of recommendation. Don't send 5, don't send 2, send the 3 that they asked for, and you are immediately heads and shoulders above other people. Most schools have some way to log in and to see all the pieces that they've received. And if not, it's okay to call and ask, did you get all the stuff that I think I sent? If there is a hole that's missing, you can then act to try to plug those holes. If you're able to do things like request extra copies of transcripts, that's one that often gets tripped up. And you can plug that hole and make sure that everything they asked for, they got, and you have met that bare minimum requirement that a lot of people cannot do. So step 1, follow directions. Step 2, I hopefully don't have to tell you to spell check and do grammar check on your essays and on your personal statements. But the other important check to do is to understand the version of yourself that comes forward in the materials that you put together. You've talked to these schools, you've come to understand what they're looking for and what you appreciate and what you like about them. So make sure that the version of yourself that comes out is the one that matches that painting, that picture that they have. A common tip that I give is ask a professor or a friend or a partner or somebody to read your essay and to tell you about you back. So if you've been looking at this school and the school talks about how they're deeply committed to quantitative analysis or really after students with this intrinsic call to international service or whatever, if you're applying to that school that's deeply committed to international service and your friend says, yeah, in this essay, it's all about how much you love doing quantitative analysis, you know that there's not necessarily that painting of yourself that's the right fit that you're trying to put forward. And likewise, if you're applying to that quant school and everything is about your deep and abiding love of public service and there's no quant in there, you know that again, it's a mismatch. So think about the version of yourself that comes forward, because for most of these schools, the written material is the main way they get to know you. Don't make things up, don't pretend, but you've drawn out, you've come to understand what they are trying to know about you. So be sure in your application material, that's the version of yourself that's honest, and that's what comes forward. And one piece of that might be some hiccups that happened along the way, right? Maybe there was some adjustment that you needed to university life, and your initial grades were not where you wanted them to be. But once you got your feet underneath you, you have this great story about overcoming obstacles and getting your grades up and this triumphant story of academic success, right? Maybe you had a family issue that caused some hiccup along the way. Maybe a global pandemic complicated your life and all of the things you had planned to do during this time period. Talk about them. The schools are going to see it. They're going to know that your grades were not there or that there was a weird period in between. Share with them as much as you feel comfortable about what happened and talk about how that informs who you are or why you're interested in a particular topic. Maybe you're really interested in global health because of the pandemic, or you're interested in immigration policy because of your family's journey, or you're interested in national security because of something that you've been exposed to. Don't let them guess. Don't let them fill in the blank. Share and own those pieces straightforwardly. And if there's something that you really aren't sure you want to share, again, having those relationships with schools can be really helpful, because you can say, look, there's this thing that happened. You're going to see some hiccups in my journey, in my narrative. Where is the line between sharing this triumphant story that informs who I am and way too much information? And they'll be able to give you guidance about how to navigate that murkiness. But if you let them guess, they're going to fill in things that may not be true or may not be the way you want to talk about something. So share how you've grown, share how that informs your own life story that we talked about. But the less they have to guess and the more you can share that story, that I would say the stronger the application you can put forward. Unfortunately, once everything's turned in, your work still isn't finished. So as I said, the first thing you need to do is make sure they got everything you think you sent. The second thing you need to do is to thank all of the people who've been part of this process, particularly your recommenders. Tell them what happened. Oh, I got into this school. Oh, I didn't get into that school. Oh, I'm going to go here. They cared enough about you to write this letter. They want to know. They want to continue to be invested in you. And you never know when you're going to need them again. So make sure that's part of this whole process, is thanking them and keeping them updated. You also can't stop with the learning and the discernment process. So you need to keep up with all of that exploration on the financing piece. And again, I'll talk about that in a minute. And you need to continue to learn about the programs you've applied to. Go to their visit day, go to the online thing, talk to faculty, talk to alumni. My hope for all of you, of course, is that you get into every graduate school that you apply to. And so at some point you have to pick. And so all of that continued learning lets you be ready when the decision time comes to really know which school makes sense for you and where you want to be. So even after that deadline, still some work to be done, both on the application piece as well as on the financial planning piece. I've talked about this a little bit, but one of the common questions I get is, what are schools looking for? Like, why do they make us do all of this? And I promise it's not just one thing. They want to see and understand you from lots of different angles to get that whole mosaic that is you. I keep talking in art terms today. I don't know why, but they really are looking for that full and complete picture. They want to know your aptitude for academic success. It's school, right? They want to make sure you are set up to survive and thrive in their academic environment. And that's why they want to see how you write. And that's why they want to see your grades. And that's why they want to see a recommendation from an academic source. All of those pieces to make sure that you're going to be set up to do well and succeed in that academic program. For our schools in particular, but I would argue most schools, they also want to see how you're set up in that broad professional direction. That's why they want your resume. That's why they want a professional letter of recommendation. That's what they want to see out of your essays and all those pieces. How is this part of your professional success as well as your academic success? And then the other piece that they're really looking for is, what are you going to be able to contribute into the classroom that's going to elevate everybody else's professional and academic understanding? Oh, you're from the West Coast. Oh, you've done this internship. Oh, you speak this language. Oh, you've had that experience. Oh, you've done this, done that. All of those pieces are things you can distinctly bring in that are going to help everybody else have a deeper and richer understanding of the material they're engaging with. So all of this comes together in the picture of yourself that comes forward in an application, not just one thing, not just one tiny subset of that. It really is a whole picture that they're looking for to get to know you and to see how you relate to them and how they relate to you. I kept promising, so here's the part where we talk about financial aid. There are lots of ways to pay for school, but on the simplest level, I want to talk about three big buckets of funding. One bucket is going to come from the school or program itself. It might be merit-based aid, it might be need-based aid. I should say there's usually more need than aid. So even the need-based aid is going to be based around the strength of the application you put together. Some schools and programs are going to be able to offer research or teaching assistant positions, which are exactly what they sound like, working with faculty as they do research or working with faculty as they teach their classes. All of that money might come from the school or entity itself, and it's going to come with different terms and conditions. So it's really important you understand what you're being offered and what you're obligating yourself to do with that school-based money. Separate from that, there can be money on the university-based level. And this is, again, where having those relationships with schools and programs is really helpful and important. Because you can say, oh, school so-and-so, I'm really excited to come to your program, but might there be any more financial aid for a student like me? And they can look to the university level and go, oh yeah, Elena, I forgot about our scholarship for people whose last names start with B. Great, here's $5,000 more. It may not be $1 million, but it's $5,000 more than you had. And it came because the school looked to the university level for you. There might be research or teaching assistant positions that are university-wide that you didn't compete for when you applied for entrance to that school. So all of this happens separate from admission to that particular grad program itself. I paid for graduate school by working at the university. And so in addition to my salary and my healthcare, I had a certain amount of funds for credits towards my graduate degree. And my office was actually down the hall from Dr. Ellis's, which is why you should always be nice to people, even when you're just starting out in your professional journey. But that was how I made graduate school affordable. So if you think you're going to have to work anyway, looking for positions at the university can be one other way to make graduate school accessible. And then the third bucket is money that's external to the educational institution itself. Some of that might be loans, some of that might be grants, but there are lots of scholarships and outside ways to find graduate school funding. Some of that money will be based on what you want to do after graduate school. The most famous ones, I think, are things like the Pickering or the Wrangle or the Payne Fellowships. And I'm very, very happy to talk about those three. I know them well. They link graduate school funding with careers at the State Department or the U.S. Agency for International Development. But there's a million other possibilities. The Department of Agriculture, the Diplomatic Security Service, if any of you have an interest in law enforcement, the intelligence community, consulting firms, all kinds of funding for what you want to do professionally after graduate school. There's money for what you do between undergrad and graduate school. And one of the best known there is the Coverdell Fellowship for folks who join the Peace Corps and complete their Peace Corps service. There's money for AmeriCorps, lots of different funding for what you do in between undergrad and grad school. There's funding for what you do while you're still an undergrad. Most of you, I think, are seniors, so it may be a little late for something like the PPIA, Public Policy International Affairs program, which is an intensive, wonderful 7-week program for rising juniors to really get them baptized into policy writing and economics and quantitative analysis. And actually, their deadline has been extended to November 15. So if any of you have friends who are sophomores and juniors, they can still compete for this, but it comes with funding for graduate school. So this is something that you do while you're still an undergrad that has that graduate school funding piece to it. I have friends who paid for grad school because they did Model UN and speech and debate and all of these kinds of things. So what you do while you're a student can also lead to those kinds of sources of graduate school funding. But there's also money just inherently based on who you are, your race, your ethnicity, your gender identity, the part of the country you're from, the part of the world your family is from. All of those different layers of yourself can have graduate school support go along with them. Any of you who are citizens of members of the Organization of American States, which any of you who are US citizens, have you, there's graduate school funding for that. If you happen to be Latvian American, there's graduate school funding for that. All of these layers of yourself can have financial support attached to them. So thinking about those parts of your identity, and we have a filterable directory on our website, but even something as simple as those pieces, graduate school and funding or scholarship into Google, may turn up opportunities that you would never known about before. I wish I had known that being Italian American had funding for graduate school. And if you do Italian American graduate school scholarship search, you'll find these opportunities. So all of those parts of yourself can also have money attached. And I shared these links earlier, but I wanted to close out by again repeating, and they're all in the chat, some of the many different tools and resources that we have to make some of this a little bit easier. Lots of events, including a whole number of ones that are coming up focused on folks who want to do graduate school for diplomacy or cybersecurity or business and trade, energy, all of those things coming up to let you build relationships with schools. We have a whole filterable directory of fellowships and scholarships on our website that lets you unpack different elements and find funding for grad school or internships or work abroad or any research. All of our schools have profiles on our website. So if you're not sure where to start, I've got 67 great opportunities there. You can read about them. You can click through to their websites. You can email them directly through our page, all of those different pieces. We have a whole career guide on our website, and then we have a really active jobs board where folks post everything from remote internships all the way up to PhD positions on a regular basis. And then I also had put our social media handles in the chat. We're as active as we can be across lots of different channels, sharing jobs, sharing internships, and sharing different opportunities. And I will put my email into the chat as well. If there's any questions you have, I'm very happy to answer them now and going forward. And on Thursday of this week, we also have what we call open office hours, where you can just wander on by, answer and have any questions that you got kicking around answered, talk to me or talk to a member of my team to try to make this whole process a little easier. But now we have about 10 minutes left. I'm sorry I talked too long. But what can I answer for you? What's brought you here today? What kinds of things are kind of keeping you up? Well, I know many of you are seniors, so how in particular can I be helpful to all of you? And feel free to raise your hands or unmute or put it in the chat, whatever's easiest. While folks are typing, Alexandra, are there particular questions that you get or that you had when you were looking at grad schools that you think would be beneficial for folks to think about?
Well, I jumped into Alexandra's computer. This is Professor Ellis, because my computer just had ran out of juice, so I kicked Alexandra out. Our students always feel like, shall I do this now? Is this a good time to do it, or shall I wait 2 years? Do I need to get more experience under my belt? Can you talk to us a little bit about the timing issue? And if you've already covered it, I apologize because I came in late. I was teaching a class.
No problem. I encourage folks to take some time in between undergrad and graduate school. I did not, and I think that my experience would have been a lot better if I had. Really for 2 reasons. One, you do have a chance to work, to explore different things, to do a fellowship. And I had done tons of internships and all of that kind of stuff. But I think it lets you have that discernment process that we talked about at the beginning. be just richer and stronger because you've just been exposed to more things. So that time in between, and you don't have to be doing some deep substantive work. You don't have to be a Wall Street trader. You don't have to be, all of these pieces. Anything that really helps to shape your thinking about what it is you want to master is well spent time. The other piece to that is I think it helps make you more competitive for different schools and programs. Partially because you've had this experience, so you maybe have a different letter of recommendation, more on your resume, et cetera. But also because you've done that discernment, your essays, that journey we talked about, all of that is just stronger because you really had a chance to think about what it is you want to master. I keep coming back to myself, but I got to the end of my grad program and went, oh, that's what I care about. But I was done. So I hadn't taken that time to really unpack all of those questions we talked about at the beginning. What is the professional toolkit I'm after? What kinds of subjects do I want to master? And some of you may know immediately. Some of you may say, oh, I have to stay in school mode. Some of you may be international students who want to stay in the States. There's lots of reasons why that time in between may not make sense for you. But if you're able to do it, I do encourage you to do it because I just think you get a lot more out of it and you can be a lot more competitive for different programs. But I see a great question in the chat. Is there a time when it's too late to apply for a master's program? Absolutely not, Elena. How early can you apply? In general, schools will open their application windows at different points. So usually to start in the fall, which is a common window for US-based institutions or schools on the US model, the application will open. Many of them are open now, September-ish, and then they'll close in January or February-ish. So in terms of early, it won't be open in August and it won't be open in April, but that window is when, and any time in that window is when you can turn your application in. So that's kind of a base answer to too early and too late. In terms of your life journey, you can't apply before you have a bachelor's degree. You can if you're finishing up, but if you're like a freshman, no, it's too early. But other than that, if you're 99 and want to go back to graduate school, okay, tell me about all those rich life experiences that you're going to bring into the classroom. But other than that, it's really not too late. Should you wait until you get your bachelor's degree or start the process of sending applications in your senior year? Absolutely. Again, if you want to go straight through with all those caveats I just shared with Professor Ellis, then now is the time to begin that 12-month cycle we just talked about, because applications are going to be due for most places in January and February. So now is the time to work on those essays, to seek out those recommender if you're a senior, right? The fall of your senior year is the time to start to put all those pieces together, because you're going to need to turn it in right after the turn of the year of your of the calendar year of your senior year. That was a really long babbly answer, Elena. Does that make sense? You give me a thumbs up or in the chat, whatever makes sense, whatever works for you. Okay, great. Other folks, things you're wrestling with? Recommendations? What kind of jobs go with what kind of degrees? All sorts of good stuff.
I don't know if you covered it, Carmen, but our students often say, well, I worked construction. I was selling shoes at Nordstrom to support my undergrad degree. How will I look unrelevant to these jobs or these graduate school applications? Will they dismiss me because of lack of prior experience?
No, not one bit. And I think it's an opportunity for you to showcase what kinds of skills and experiences those jobs have built for you, right? If you've worked retail at Nordstrom's, I bet you were really good at customer service, understanding what somebody needed, responding to their requests, guiding them in a particular direction that made sense to them. So reading that person, emotional intelligence, and then saying to them, oh, you should not wear that bright orange outfit, or whatever it is. That's exactly what folks in the intelligence community do, right? They are trying to anticipate and understand what their client needs, steer them in a particular direction, respond to their requests in a polite and kind and timely way. So there's lots of ways to draw out what happened during that experience. Maybe you had a lot of money that you had to handle. Maybe you were a floor manager and you had lots of staff who reported to you. Maybe it was just about being in the right place at the right time and doing your job really well in a way that delivered for the company, delivered for customers. All of that is relevant stuff that employers want to see and that you can talk about in your application materials. So if you did work construction, I bet again, you were really good with detail. You were really good at understanding safety. You were really good at working in a team, because most buildings don't get built by one person. Maybe if, depending on that particular environment at Nordstrom's or on a construction site, maybe there were people from lots of different parts of the world that you had to work with and interact with. All of that is absolutely relevant to what we're doing in these programs. And if you can contribute that and bring that out in your essays and say, I'm really interested in sustainability because buildings are the #1 contributor to climate change, and I was building buildings and I want to do it better and I want to see policies be better. Or I got really interested in Guatemala because all of my colleagues at Nordstrom's were from Guatemala, and I really got deeply interested in the history of Latin America. All of that is relevant stuff that you can bring in, and it's only going to come from someone with your lived experience. So schools love that kind of thing because it's a wonderful contribution that you can make to everybody else's understanding of particular issues. Elaine asks, if you were to get declined from a program, can you reapply in the future? Absolutely. Schools would also see that as a real interest in their program. And again, that from that relationship perspective, to know, like, I really want to be at your school, and maybe I didn't make it this time, but I'm going to work on this thing, or I'm going to stay in touch with you and go to your events and do that. That's a great way to show continued interest in them. And schools will invest in students who want to be at their school, not any school. So absolutely, if you get declined, reapply and do all of those things in between to think about how you stay in relationship with them and work on whatever didn't get you over the hurdle the first time. Great. Julian, Ahani, Faith, Carlos, any questions that I can answer for you all? Elena, not that I'm not happy to keep talking with you.
No, I've been happy just listening to everything that everyone has to say.
Great.
Yeah, this has been really informative. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. Faith wonders, for one of the graduate schools you want to apply, you need an academic and a professional recommendation. Yeah, absolutely. A recommendation from a manager is a professional recommendation, because the things they're trying to understand are all about those deliverables: customer service, attention to detail, teamwork, leadership, financial management, and that can come from any kind of role. And it's always useful for any kind of recommendation to give your recommenders some guidance, to say, hey, could you talk about that time when I had that huge party at the Cheesecake Factory and they were really cranky and really drunk and really awful, and I handled it so well, and I did this thing and that thing and still came out with, from this difficult situation on top. Or that time when I had to manage this whole team of people to accomplish a goal in my student club, or whatever it was. Give your recommenders some ammunition, because again, you've done all this homework to know what the schools are hoping to see. So make sure you feed your recommenders some of those pieces. But a manager from any professional situation who can talk about those elements is absolutely beneficial to draw out. It doesn't have to, you could have a letter of recommendation from the Pope, but if all they can say is, Julian is nice, he did stuff, who cares, right? I would much rather have a recommendation from that Cheesecake Factory manager who can say, wow, they were faced with this challenge and they overcame it and they did this thing, and I'm so glad they were part of my team, and they talked about how, they want to go explore the world, or they really feel committed to service, or like whatever it is. That's a way stronger letter than the most famous person you can find, who can't talk 2 sentences about who you are and what you're interested in and what you've done. So 100%, Faith, 100%. I'll throw my email again in the chat. If you think of anything at 3 o'clock in the morning, your time or my time, I'm on the East Coast, feel free to drop me a message. And then I mentioned that on October 26th, we're going to have open office hours, so you can feel free to just wander by and ask anything. But we are absolutely here to make this process easier. We're absolutely here to answer your questions and to make it less scary and less stressful.
And we are very grateful for all the resources that you provide for these amazing, this is probably like the 6th time or 8th time Carmen has talked to our students in various years. We're very grateful to APSIA's resources. I blast them all the time. And, we are just, you really contribute to the well-being and success of our students. APSIA really makes a big difference. So our department really appreciates it.
Well, I have several family members who graduated from SFSU, so I don't think I could go to my in-laws for Christmas if I didn't take good care of you all. So very happy to be of service in this way.
So if there are no other questions, I'll let Carmen go because I know she has a busy schedule, but please feel free to reach out to her. I know how approachable she is. So thank you so much, Carmen, for everything.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.